All right, so hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's nice to see such a big crowd, even on a Saturday on the last slot. I hope you all have enjoyed Devoxx Greece so far. All right, great. That's nice. I love to hear that. Yeah, so, first before I start my talk, let me give a big thanks to all of the organizers and the helpers that make this conference possible. I feel like this deserves a big applause from us. It's amazing what they did, and really, the organization was great, and, I hope to see you next year as well. So, my talk is called 82 Bugs I Collected in a Year You Won't Believe Made it to Production. And actually, I already have an admission to make to you. The title is actually a lie. Actually, I didn't collect 82 bugs. I collected 211 bugs. I'm really sorry. I hope you can forgive me for that. I hope you're not mad about that. Yeah, so, a year is also not quite correct. It's more like 2 years, but, it doesn't matter. So you get more value out of this talk, so it's great for you. So that's what matters. And also, of course, it wouldn't be a talk about bugs without a bug in the title, right? So by the way, the bugs that I'm going to show you, those are bugs that I encountered in my day-to-day life, just using apps and browsing websites. But I don't count any apps or websites that I contributed to myself, just to avoid some bias. Or if you want, you can also think that maybe there are too many mistakes, so the number would be way too high, anyways. Yeah. So my name is François Martin, and I'm a senior full-stack software engineer working at Karakun. And we are a company that develops software for customers, and we also do consulting. And I'm also an active member of the Swiss Testing Board, where it's about bringing forward testing in terms of certifications and so on. And there I'm also a co-author of 2 upcoming syllabi. And I'm also a bug collector. Oh, sorry, that was not supposed to be there. I mean, these kinds of bugs. My name is really bad in a way that I trigger so many bugs that I don't want to, but it just too happens to be the case. And if you think this is the only case, think again. And also examples like this. And then there are some weird things like this that are happening. Is being stubborn, what does that mean? And also, I tried it again and it didn't help. So, to me, this is also kind of a bug. Yeah. And then, I was thinking maybe I could look at the frequently asked questions. Maybe this helps out. Well, unfortunately not. So, yeah. And then here, for example, where you can see it says the name only contains alphanumeric characters which may affect the voice control function of the device. It is recommended to change the name. I mean, why should it affect the voice control if it's alphanumeric? And why exactly? Or how should I change it exactly? I couldn't figure it out. So, yeah. And then when I was looking for domains, it said, this domain is still available. Get it today before it's gone. Not available. Damn it. Yeah, this was very unfortunate. Or here, for example, where it asks me, how many days do you want to add? Do you want object? Which one do you want? No idea. And then here, my boarding pass not being recognized, null, whatever null means here. Actually, this reminds me, yesterday I experienced for the first time in my life that I was actually hoping that there would be a bug. Because yesterday, when I was at the baggage claim belt at the airport in Athens, and my bag didn't come for a while, I checked my tracker, and it showed that the location was pinged 10 minutes ago in Milan. And I was really hoping that this was a bug, because I was thinking, I want my luggage. But unfortunately, it wasn't a bug, and it's unfortunate they still don't have my luggage. I hope I get it at some point. Otherwise, it gets sent to me at home. And if you think that's the only case where we have null, think again. So, null's iPhone, null's phone, so, yeah. But null aren't the only issues that we are having. We are also having issues with nan and undefined, and sometimes even both at the same time. So, good luck booking a hotel this way, right? Yeah, and then, even if I try to send an email to somebody or try to read my emails, suddenly there are no emails to be found, which is kind of annoying. And even AI is not safe from bugs, as you can see here. What does _bar mean in the thinking process, or _request, _findings? I don't think it was supposed to be like that. And then, of course, there are things like this, where a CSS framework, ironically, has some issues with the dark theme, as you can see here. If you can't read it, by the way, I can't either. it's fine. And then, of course, something that we as developers are always struggling with, counting, right? Yeah, exactly. So let's look at the bugs that I found per month. So I mentioned it's technically a little over 2 years. You can see I started collecting already a bit longer ago, but back then I didn't collect as seriously in the beginning. I just started, to take screenshots of bugs out of curiosity. And then, like, in the beginning of January 2024, I started to notice, there are a lot more bugs than I would have expected. So let's, really take a screenshot of every bug I can find. And then you can see from there on it starts to be more consistent. And you can see that in most cases there were more than 5 bugs per month, which, to be honest, kind of shocked me. I didn't expect to find that many. I didn't expect to find any, but yeah, that's fine. And you can see there has been a peak in August of 2024. I don't know where this is coming from. I do know where the peak from February of 2025 is coming from. I booked a lot of travel there, and it just so happened that I experienced a lot of bugs there. So yeah, that was probably one of the reasons, I think. So yeah, and it's kind of crazy to think that there are so many of them, especially considering I'm not actively trying to find the bugs. They just happen to me in my daily life. I don't want to experience them. I hope that at some point I'm not able to give this talk anymore because there will be 0 bugs. This is kind of my hope with this talk. So before I'm showing you the results and what kind of bugs I found, I'm curious, so who of you, what do you think, like, what is the most common type of bug I've found? Any ideas? Yeah? No? Okay. Any more ideas? Object, okay. Yeah? From submitting from? Validation. Okay, that's a good point as well, yeah. Any other ideas? Okay. Not a number, okay, yeah. Good thinking as well. My name, okay, yeah, that's a good point as well, for sure, yeah. Any other ideas? Okay, let's see what the actual numbers are. So first I categorize them in types. So here you can see I categorize them in the types UI, logic, and so on. So I18N stands for internationalization. For those of you that don't know yet, this is related to translation, related bugs, and so on. So UI means that it's a bug that I suspect to be likely in the front end. Of course, I can't know 100% for sure because I don't develop those applications. But just looking at my experience, I would say that most likely the bug is just in the front end. And logic means it's a bug that's most likely in the back end. And you can see this it didn't really surprise me in a way because I already knew that the unit testing that we are performing in the back end, we already have this down quite a lot, but we are not testing the front end as much. I feel like that's maybe one area where we should put a bit more emphasis on to also make sure that we have component tests in place for the front end. But this is something that is missing a bit. And by the way, I see some people taking pictures. If you scan this QR code on the top right, you can actually enter your name and your email address, and I will send you an email with the slides, and also I will send you another email when the recording is out, so you can send it to someone else or watch it again if you want to. So, make sure, this will be on every slide, by the way, so you don't need to hurry, but, don't forget it at the end. And then, after categorizing them in types, I was also categorizing them in subtypes. And here I was kind of surprised to see that most of them were in responsiveness. You can see this was not a guess at all by people. I kind of thought that this was something we already knew how to do. And then there is unresolved templating, which we will get to a bit later, what this means in detail. some glitching. So I gave this talk already, this is the third time I'm giving it this year. And the first time I gave it, glitching was a lot lower. And then last time I gave it, glitching was already a bit higher, or was a lot higher now. And this hasn't changed. Again, here I will get into the details a bit more later. But this was kind of surprising to me to see that glitching was that high up. Text keys is about seeing text keys, for example, where there shouldn't be any text keys. Yeah, and I was also kind of surprised that calculation was so high. And I kind of thought that we had unit testing figured out, or to be able to calculate those things correctly. But apparently this isn't the case. So, yeah. And now that we have seen what kind of bug subtypes there are, let me go into a bit more how we can fix them in detail. And there I'm going through the most common, or the ones that I felt like, after the most common, which are the most relevant or interesting to talk about. So let's go to responsiveness. Who of you has seen something like that? Raise your hands. Almost everybody. It's not a surprise at all to me. Yeah, this is something that is really annoying. And in some cases, this can even be something that is a blocker bug, essentially. If you look at this example here, you can see that we have the More Models button. When we click it, it opens something on the side, but it is cut off. We cannot click it. So essentially, you could consider that maybe there wasn't that much priority into testing this part, because maybe they were thinking, this is something that we don't need often, so it's maybe fine. But still, I'm not in the team that develops the software, but if I was, this would be a blocker to me, because you cannot access certain functionality that you would be able to. And they fixed this by now, by the way. I'm not sure if they've seen my talk, but yeah. And to be able to fix this, one of the ways is mobile-first design. Who of you is familiar with mobile-first design? Okay, so I see like 20 hands maybe. So mobile-first design is about when you design a website, you first start out by designing it by changing your browser size to be the size of a mobile phone. Because usually when you design a user interface with the constraints of a mobile phone, then usually the design scales better. The design may not be, as nice to use on a desktop if you just take the mobile version and scale it up, but at least it works usually. It's just that in some cases, if you do it the other way around, if you do the desktop first and then you scale it down to mobile, usually there are issues like this which don't work. So by designing it, with mobile having in mind first, this is something that you can avoid these kinds of bugs. And then how you can also prevent them is to use end-to-end testing, because if, for example, you were to say, click on this button, click on more models and then click on this specific model, then you would see, for example, it couldn't click it, so the test would fail at that point. And I recommend, especially if you can, doing it on mobile devices, because this makes for the most true experience you can have, of course. You can use frameworks like WebDriver.io to test on simulators or emulators, and also on real devices, which is a really big advantage. You can also use Playwright if you want, but Playwright kind of has a disadvantage that it can only kind of emulate the way that a mobile phone works. It cannot directly test on them. So, just keep this in mind. But one thing that, or one problem that you have in end-to-end testing in general, but also with, especially with mobile end-to-end testing, are so-called flaky tests. So a flaky test is when you have a test that, for example, fails, it passes maybe first, and then you run it again, and then maybe it fails, and then maybe you run it again, and then it passes. Who of you had a test like this before? Okay, so that's a lot of people of you. So also, by the way, if you scan this QR code, you get a free copy of an ebook I've written on how to fix flaky tests. So, then you can finally fix all of those flaky tests that you're having. Because this really is a big problem, as I've found in a lot of companies, this pattern I noticed. So let's go to unresolved templating. So who of you has seen something like this before? Okay, it's surprisingly not that many, I would say maybe less than half of the people. So, here we have, for example, the case where you have a text that Here specifically, this would be more like, this is like an internationalization bug, but essentially it's like you have text that is just like template text that you didn't replace with something else. And in this case, we have something that is, you can see the text keys, which you shouldn't. You should see the real text. This isn't the only example. We have these cases as well. Even here we find out that it's JSP, which is also maybe not the best idea to reveal in terms of security, of course. And then we also have things like this, where you have maybe a placeholder in the code like, not available that you didn't fill out. So yeah, this can definitely be something like this. But those were kind of minor, I would say. For me, they would be kind of minor, but this can also be a blocker. Like, for example, if you have a look at this example here, it says, we would like you to remind that the reception is open xnum x out of xnum x every day. Great. And I can tell you, I was thinking about booking this hotel, but I was arriving quite late, and I knew I needed to have, 24-hour, check-in. And since they had this on the website, I didn't end up booking the hotel in the end. So they lost the customer, essentially, by having a bug like this in the code. So we may think of bugs like this not having a significant impact, but this kind of shows how significant the impact can be on the business. So, by preventing those, we can really make sure that, the users know what the times are, and they may be more relevant than you think. And another case that is maybe not as bad is, in an email, I've seen this. And this is more something that doesn't seem as professional, especially if you're getting something like this from a software development company, you're thinking like, do they have their stuff figured out, really? I mean, it can happen to everyone, right? I can tell you I found those bugs in like big applications, small applications, and everything in between. So it really affects everyone, but still it gives kind of like an unprofessional feeling in a way. And how you can fix this is by doing unit or integration testing. Here I recommend you test the email templates as well, which I have noticed is missing from a lot of tests at different companies that have been in the past. What you can do if you don't want to test all of the email templates, specifically to test for the replacements, one thing that I recommend you doing, which is very easy, is to simply assert that the placeholders are missing. You most likely have the placeholders somewhere in a JSON file or something like that, and it is quite easy to extract them usually, and then just run it through the function that you have to replace things, and then just check if that does not contain any of the text keys that you have in your JSON file or wherever you have them. And then this way you can quite easily check, with just one generic test that goes through all of the email templates, if you have like a generic mechanism for that. And then you can very easily find out if you have some things that you missed implementing. And also make sure, of course, to test some edge cases. So for example, where you have no value or where you have a very long value, because sometimes that also breaks the layout. Or of course, going by my name with UTF-8 characters, of course, because they sometimes also don't show up correctly in the code encoding. Then we get to glitching. So this is a bit of a difficult thing, because glitching to me is like, I have no idea how this happened. If you look at this screenshot, for example, you can see here, there are multiple things that are kind of wrong. We have some JSON that is placed in here inline for some reason. It's not really, there's some formatting, but not really, and it's all weird. It doesn't really make sense to me. So yeah, this is a good example. Or this was another weird one. When I checked the backups on my iPad, it said iPad and then this weird thing. I had actually no idea what this meant. By the way, I found out afterwards this is Thai, and it means this device, apparently. At least what I got from machine translation. If one of you can speak Thai, let me know afterwards if it was right or not. But yeah, it's very weird. I have no idea how this could happen. I don't have Thai specified anywhere. I'm as far from it as you could be. So I have no idea how that happened. Yeah, so let's look at another bug. This is actually probably my top 3 bugs that I've ever seen. So I was writing, due to genuine bug, comma, but, and then it says like, no, that's wrong. It's not bug, comma, but, it's a genuine, and then it says, the incorrect thing would be bug, and it says like write bug space bug. What? No idea how this happened. Again, like those are those weird kind of bugs that don't really make sense. And it's kind of difficult to give advice here specifically, but of course one of them is end-to-end testing that you can do. But what I think is even more effective is something that is called dog fooding. Who of you knows what dog fooding is? Okay, so not that many. So who of you do dog fooding at your company? Okay, so 1 or 2 hands. That's nice to see. So dog fooding is about, the term kind of comes from eating your own dog food. So essentially like if you are at a company that is producing dog food, they kind of have the principle of, you should, when the dog food is produced, give it to your dogs to see, if they like it. And the principle is here similar in software engineering, where it's about, for example, especially if you have like an application like this, where it's about correcting grammar, then it makes sense that you have, for example, in your company that you encourage the people to use the software, or maybe you pre-install it for every employee. And then this way, and also encourage them, of course, to submit bugs whenever they find them. And then this way you can find strange bugs like this because, those are sometimes a bit difficult to test. But, seeing how I found this bug just through regular usage, if people were using this regularly, they should have caught this bug as well, I think. And then another one is exploratory testing, where it's about, let me first ask, who of you knows what exploratory testing is? 5 to 10 people, not bad. And who of you does it? Oh, about the same amount of people, interesting. Okay, that's cool. So to those that don't know, it's about, doing tests that are performed by experts, and they are using the app or the website hands-on. And they're kind of both designing and executing the test cases at the same time and on the fly. And they are using their intuition and their experience to identify defects that are maybe missed with doing scripted tests. And this is a very effective method. I really like doing those sessions with, the stakeholders, for example, where I just give them 1 hour to, with a certain goal in mind to just click through the app and see, does it behave as expected? You will be probably surprised how many bugs you can find this way, actually. And then there's another bug that I just recently encountered at Vox Days Zurich when I was using the schedule from Devoxx. And there's the same schedule actually now here. I didn't use it enough to be able to judge if the bugs was already fixed. I also reported this one, by the way. But here you can see how it looks like. So yeah, you can see, I really have no idea how this could have happened. And it turned out actually that there were not that many people affected by it. Most people were not, but there were some people that were affected by it. So I may have just gotten unlucky. I don't know, I'm really not trying to find those bugs on purpose. Yeah. And then we have string formatting. So string formatting for me is a bug where it's about the text not being adjusted depending on the input. As you can see in the screenshot on the right, we have my plus way. So for context, when I was searching, I searched for my space way, and then I clicked on one of the songs, and then once it played it, it says playing from search, and it says my plus way instead of my space way. So probably they had somewhere that they encoded this to be able to send back to the backend, and then they used this in the app in a different place. So yeah, this is a bug, by the way, that you see most of the time with internationalization. So oftentimes when you have multiple languages, I noticed that this bug occurs more. But there have been situations where I encountered this bug where it was not, even for websites that were only in English, for example, like this here, where it says number of guests, 2 guests. So yeah, this is also something that happens a lot. And here, again, unit and integration testing helps. Specifically here, I recommend doing parameterized testing or data-driven testing. Who of you knows what that is? Okay, so most of you, that's nice to see. And who of you does it? Okay, also most of people, that's nice. Else, by the way, when you have the slides, you can click on those underlined things and it will show you, like for example, parameterized testing, how to do this with JUnit, so you can try it out yourself. I recommend doing it. And this helps you to create a lot of test cases easily because you can simply duplicate a line and then add another test case this way. And this really makes it easy to test a lot of different test cases. And I noticed if you have a parameterized test, then developers are much more encouraged to add new test cases versus having to copy and paste the test and then come up with a different name and so on and so forth. And also it reduces duplication, which is very nice. Of course, you have to pay attention with internationalization. So for example, here we have the case with the 2 guests where it should be 2 guests. And then if we have 1, we say 1 guest. And then, for example, with 0, we have 0 guests again. And this can be different depending on the language. You know, for example, you know, it may be that in, I don't know, in Thai, I don't know, it isn't that it would be 0 guests, but maybe 0 guests. So this is something you should keep in mind. When you're doing tests, you know, make sure to look up, for example, just like some foreign languages that you are supporting, maybe not ones that are the most obvious ones, if you see some differences, and then test for them specifically to make sure that this also works properly. And again, of course, test some edge cases like, you know, the usual suspects like 0, 1, 2, and so on. And then going to the text keys, just text keys showing, like in this example here that you can see. We have here another bug that I would consider to be a blocker. We have here, like, it says blue light filter disclaimer. Especially with disclaimers, you can run into issues with legal troubles. So you can imagine if this is a disclaimer, you know, the customer could rightfully claim they did not read the disclaimer because they have not seen it. I mean, it says disclaimer here, but, you know, what should the customer know if it doesn't show up? So this is another example of why it's critical to take issues like this seriously, you know, even though it may seem minor if you think about it at first, but this could result in you getting sued and then resulting in real consequences due to that. And then here again, do unit and integration testing. Again, you can here test for different replacements, as I mentioned earlier. And also there are libraries like i18next, which can log a warning when there is a text key that is not translated, which is kind of useful, especially if you have a good test coverage on the component tests in the front end. What I like to do is, underlined in this fails on console warnings, there is like a link to a plugin that I like to use, which when using it, when there is a test that has a console warning, will make it fail. And usually the warning that gets logged by i18next will make the test fail then. And this makes it very easy to see if you're missing some text keys that you forgot to translate, for example. And, but of course, you need to have good test coverage with that to be able to really make use of it. So yeah, this is only as effective as you have component tests for it. And then also we have something that is called flashing of text keys, where sometimes it's not that the text key is shown, you know, and keeps being shown that way, but it may show for a second or two, and then it changes into the real text. This is usually if you, for example, have the text keys that you, you know, give back to the front end, and then you do an asynchronous call to, for example, get the JSON file, where you can then use that to, on the client, replace the text keys. And then this flashing of text keys occurs quite often. A way to prevent that is to use something called server-side rendering, where you're doing this already on the server side and you're giving back to the client already the version of the HTML that has the text keys replaced. Then you don't run into this issue. But if you cannot use SSR for some reasons, you can also use something that's called a skeleton screen. I'm sure all of you have seen this. It's like a placeholder which shows you, for example, when the internationalization files have not been loaded yet. And then we have unfiltered error messages. Like, who of you has seen errors like this before? Okay, yeah, almost everyone. So I'm not surprised again. I mean, again, as a user, I have no idea what to make of this. I mean, me as a developer, maybe a bit more, but still, like, you know, this doesn't really help me. And in the same vein goes something like this. You know, I mean, somebody that has an error in the browser console, they cannot do anything with that. Yeah. So here we have another example where actually this is, again, a blocker in my opinion, because this reveals sensitive information. You know, I you know, censored it here, you know, just to not expose any information that is critical. But you can see we already learn a lot just from this error message. We learn this must be some kind of C# application, because, you know, it mentions like system.web.htp context, which are C# you know, components. And then we see also that it runs on Windows, and we see the path. We see C users workbox. And this is something that can really, help you if you are an attacker to, find how to exploit the system. And this is why you really need to make sure that you avoid those unfiltered error messages being shown in your production system. So it can be a security issue, as we have seen earlier, but it can also be a usability issue. As you can see on the bottom, you can see the field coupon must match the regular expression, and then we have regular expression here. Yeah, I mean, me as a developer, it's easier to understand, but most people that are in this online shop entering a coupon code, they are probably not developers. So, yeah, and even then, most developers wouldn't want in their spare time, at least I don't want in my spare time to decode regexes. It's not really something I like to do, so, yeah. And then, what I recommend doing is turning off stack traces in production, at least them being shown to the user. They're, of course, fine in logs and so on, but definitely don't show them to the user in any way. And also in production, in general, I recommend you only show explicit errors that you return from the backend. So make sure to implement a mechanism that allows you to return explicit errors, and when they are returned, you show them to the user to be able to give them feedback on what they should do. But otherwise, if it's like a generic error, if it's just any error, like a null pointer exception, just show them a generic error that shows like, an unexpected error occurred, please try again later, or contact blah, 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 to if this issue persists. And here, by the way, I recommend you put here an email address, because I've encountered issues where I was on a website and it said, something went wrong, and then said, like, click here to contact support. And then I clicked on the support link, and you can imagine I've seen the same page again, where it says, like, you have an error, click on the support. And yeah, this doesn't really help me. If you have an email address that you show, they can easily just message you, and it's much easier. You don't risk anything, breaking in any way, because this is more likely to work than a full-blown support page, which has many different complex components on it. So, and then also I recommend you adding alerting for errors from the front end and the back end. So I see a lot of alerting being done for the back end, but not a lot of people do alerting for the front end as well. What I usually like to do is to send all of the errors that I encounter client-side to the server as well, to then ingest this into a centralized log system, to then also get alerts when for example someone is having an unexpected issue. Like we had a case where somebody was using some old obscure browser version that was, by the way, still supported because it was an LTS version. And we didn't know we were using a feature that was quite new and it wasn't supported in the newest, in the older versions of this browser. And we found this out actually due to this alerting, because this alerting, sent us the error. And this was very useful because we were able to proactively debug the issue. And we did eventually get the bug report, but it was nice because at the moment when we got the bug report, we were already investigating it. So this is like usually the best case that you can have. Then there's unfiltered debug information. You can see here, I see a lot of people, making frowny faces, this is kind of the worst case that can happen, like showing an SQL statement to your users. So I'm not sure, but I would guess that most likely they had this in place for debug reasons, to be able to find out in case something went wrong, what the query was that was being executed. And again, this has security implications. You really want to make sure that you don't show this to the user, because if your website was vulnerable to an SQL injection attack, then they could use this to more easily enumerate the database and so on. And here I really recommend you turn off debug flags for production, and also don't just turn them on for a few seconds and be like, it will be fine. Because the chances are that maybe, I'm not sure if this was the case in this bug, but that maybe someone accidentally stumbles upon it. And if you have to do this, then use feature flags for specific users. So only turn it on for specific users. But even then, it's still better to log it in some log file and not show it in the front end if possible. And of course, make sure you prevent SQL injection and also cross-site scripting, so that you don't even run into this issue in the first place. And then lastly, we have incorrect or missing information, which can also be equally devastating. So when I was converting the price from Japanese yen to Swiss franc, you can see there in the bottom, there's a huge dip, and it says that it's the exchange rate was 0.0058, which, I don't know. I mean, there wasn't like an economic crisis at that point, so it wasn't like a real data point. But of course, this is kind of critical because someone could believe that and not check the graph and think, oh, this is the amount that I need to spend, and they're like, oh, this price is fine, and then they find out, oh, it's actually a lot more than that. So, yeah, here what I recommend doing is if you're entering data manually, then make sure you have some kind of 4i principle implemented where someone else is reviewing it and approving the change that you're making, because then this error would have appeared. Or also add some validations in case of data being significantly different from previous data. Like here, for example, if you would have a validation in place that says, the day before or the time frame before it was like at 0.6 and suddenly it dropped by so much, this can't be right. Then throw an alarm somewhere to inform the team, and also don't show it to the user, of course. This is something I really recommend doing. And then, especially if you are fetching data from an API, especially like in financial applications or other critical applications, I really recommend you to do some plausibility checks, which can be, of course, like this, where you wouldn't expect the currency rate exchange to drop that significantly usually. So maybe there, if you notice something like this, or just in general, any kind of unexpected data, like let's say it suddenly says 999,000 as the exchange rate, this also doesn't make sense. Flag this, and then you can either, for example, depending on your application, still show the data, but show like a warning that says, consider, this data is outdated, or it could be wrong, or something like that if you're showing the old data. Or you could also not show any data at all, and then just show like an error message that says like, please try again, we're having an issue or something like that. Yeah, so that was already it. So again, you have the QR code here, for your last chance to grab it. And also, if you like, I have some stickers, by the way, that I brought with me, so you can also approach me afterwards if you want some stickers. But now I still have a little bit of time left for questions. Does somebody have any question? Yeah, sure.
Hello. Thanks for the talk. Very interesting.
You're welcome.
Maybe first, more of a comment regarding building alerting frameworks. I mean, there are solutions already out there like front-end monitoring, real user monitoring. Mm-hmm. Just want to put that out there. You don't need to build it yourself, I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. The other one is a real question. Mm-hmm. I think we have a reporting problem also. Yeah, I mean, many people see bugs. Mm-hmm. How many really do report them? That would be the question for you. How many out of those did you report to the to the writers? And maybe following up to that, maybe it's also a problem. Why don't we make it easier to report problems? Yeah, so create that button there. I mean, you mentioned that with the email address, but also capturing screenshots, create the ticket automatically with a click of a button, something like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the question: how many did you report? Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the comment as well. I think this is a good point. Try to not reinvent the wheel. There are already great solutions out there usually. And also thanks for the question. I think it's a great question. I can totally agree with you. I'm also kind of suffering, or have been always suffering about users not reporting bugs. This is why it's so important, just like I mentioned, to implement like the alerting from front-end errors, for example, because those are some of the most underreported errors that we have. And usually those help you to proactively find errors, even if users don't report it. So kind of, this was my way of working around this problem of users not reporting it. But of course, as you mentioned, this is not an ideal solution. We should be making it easier for people to report things. That's, you're absolutely right about that. And actually, applications I've implemented before, I've been doing this. Like, for example, usually, when an error happened in the front end, for example, I would show like a toast which showed like, an unexpected error occurred, and then I would show like a trace ID, and I even had like a link which, when you clicked it, would open in your email application a new email with all of the all of the things pre-filled, so that you can simply hit send, and then it will be sent off. And of course you can add any other information you want. And this is kind of, I think, a great way of doing this. I don't know why not more companies are doing this. I feel like it's mostly they are thinking if a bug is severe enough, they will probably let us know. And this was actually the approach that I've taken, since I've found so many bugs, I didn't have the time, of course, to report all of them, especially because not all of those bugs were reproducible. I mean, I didn't put in too much effort to try to actively reproduce them because, still, even if it's not reproducible, in my opinion, it's still a bug that needs to be fixed. But reporting an issue to someone that is not reproducible doesn't really help, I feel like, or it's difficult, of course. I mean, right, you should still do it. But I mean, just I usually like when I take the time to report something, I want to have a high quality report of something that they can actually do something with that. And I did report the bugs that were so severe that I couldn't continue in the process. Like, let's say I was on a form and then I noticed, there were some validations in place, I cannot continue, or like with this coupon code, I did contact them and let them know, or like bugs that were especially severe, like the one with the glitching that we've seen earlier, but not the ones that I thought were kind of minor. For me, the bar wasn't high enough for that. Yeah, I mean, I hope that answered your question. Thank you so much. Any other questions? All right, so I see everybody's already tired and wants to go home. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for coming here. I really appreciate it, and have a great day.